Backyard DIY Engineering. This is Jim coming to you. Check it out. We have this T-top. We're going to add it to this boat, and we're going to come out with this cool completion. This will be a multi-part series, mostly explaining the proper positioning of a T-top. I will be giving tips and tricks on how to install a T-top, but I'm mostly doing this because I couldn't find anywhere on the YouTube where I could actually get better explanation of where I should place this T-top. In this first part, we'll unpack everything and do a quick inventory.
The reason why I went with the SG900 series is because this series has a 2.5 inch upright frame. I went with a sturdier frame because one thing I can't stand is a shaking frame above my head. Plus you'll see we're going to be adding a canopy to it where you need some extra support there. I'll tell you what, so far I'm really happy with the construction. I can tell you what, the internet and some of the comments so far are very wrong about the construction.
So while unpacking this, make sure that you're checking for any dents or scratches or anywhere the paint may have rubbed off, because this is your one and only chance to reach back out to the manufacturer and see if you can't get a new piece. Luckily, everything in my packages came in pristine and in great shape, and we're ready to continue unpacking. As you can tell, this came in 4 great big boxes. It was only about 10 total parts, so it wasn't too many to inventory, but everything looked good, so let's get going.
Alright, so the first thing we want to do is we want to protect the surfaces before we even get started, or we even start looking at what we're gonna do mounting wise. And the reason why is you're gonna possibly bump things and you're gonna bump edges. And one thing you don't want to do is damage your new product or your boat. So I like to protect things. So the first thing, we're gonna protect the floor with just some regular old masking tape. We're gonna mask everywhere we think that we're gonna move these feet. I would do a good 4-foot section by about 6 inches wide. You know you're gonna keep it as close as you can to your center console, so you don't have to go real wide with the tape, but do carry a big, large area. And then I'm gonna wrap my center console with some shrink wrap because I have plenty of it. I'm gonna unmount my fire extinguisher, just get it out of the way for now. We may have to move that. We'll figure out in the end. But let's move that for now. That's just one less thing we have in our way. Now that I've wrapped that, let's go ahead and get the floor done. Now it's your preference how many times around you go with the shrink wrap. A few times, cover everything as much as you can. I'm going to protect the light just because I didn't get down low enough. And then to protect the floor. Again, I'm gonna go past my center console and past where I know I'm gonna put it on the front, just so if you're sliding things around, you don't scratch up the floor. All right, let's talk about one of the topics when we talk about placement and where we're gonna place this. You know, I've heard horror stories about these kits. People putting them in, they break, the welds break. 9 times out of 10, they not intentionally or unintentionally pointed at the installer, but what they ended up doing is not bolting this to a level surface. If your floor is not perfectly level, then you're gonna have to shim that unit. It is made to work on a level surface. That is one key point to remember in placement. All right, in this part, what we're gonna do is we're gonna mock up the sides. I recommend, if this is the first time you've ever done something like this, that you completely mock up the unit. You don't need to put the canvas cover or anything or any of the lockdowns or anything like that. But if you assemble the whole thing, you kind of know what it's going to look like and where things are going to lay. What we're going to do is put one side up and then look at it and see where we want to place it. One key thing to remember whenever you're talking placement or picking out one of these units, if you've got a side door compartment, like mine actually has a bathroom down here, and I've heard horror stories where people have to either take off bolts to get down to their room. That's a big no-no for me. I want access to my unit. So you'll notice I bought a unit to where the first crossbar is actually above the door. That's a key important thing when you talk about placement. One thing we'll talk about later is putting Loctite on these things so that the stainless steel and aluminum don't gall each other up and ends up corroding. But right now we don't want to put that on there because we're going to pull them right back out and it makes a mess. So keep that in mind. I will be taking these out.
Alright, so let's get these two side pieces together. This will allow us to preset the unit so that once we do build the first main section and we put it up, we don't have to do as much moving around and figuring out. Getting the measurements done now is so much easier. If you are by yourself, this is the easiest way. If you have somebody else, go ahead and build the whole unit.
Alright, now that we have this section built up, this is the important side because it has the door, and the other side will just follow suit unless you have some kind of device or something in the way. Now I do have a battery on off switch, but if it gets in the way on that side, I'll move it. If you don't want to move it, then you may want to check both sides before you finalize your position. So right now what I want to do is I need to make sure that I have a place to where I can hook a tie-in binder between the T-top frame and the actual center console. That keeps your center console from doing this type of movement while it's underway. It's very important to also keep, it really helps the welds at the feet. You know, if not, they're really taking all of that force. So it's really important to try to find a place. It's best if you can get all 4 points, but if you can only get 2 points, then you should be okay. I can move it back as far as here and not inhibit the door. And to be honest, that ends up being a really great position for me, because one thing I want to do here in the future, as I told y'all, is I'm going to build a windshield all the way across the front portion of this. You know, because I want to be able to protect myself during the winter time and create a box in here to where I can actually fish this and when it's you know, below freezing. Alright, so now I'm happy where I'm going to place it. We're going to go 54.5 to the back wall to the first foot. That's the first important measurement. Now that you know where you want to place it,
go ahead and transfer the same measurements to the other side. That way, once we build this unit completely up into its mock-up stage, you'll easily be able to place it on these marks and know exactly where it needs to go.
Alright everybody, I've got Doot Rag here as a helper now. We're going to go ahead and we're going to assemble the top part in two sections. We're going to assemble the front section and the back section. Then we're going to go ahead and bolt the front section to the top, loose fitly, and then we're going to sit the top back in place, and then we'll move on to the next bit of tips that I'm going to explain to you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get this front half built up. You won't have to bolt up the back portion until later because it doesn't affect us getting it bolted to the floor, but at least with the front section of the T-top, this will allow us to place the feet correctly, and it also makes sure everything is square. One tip to throw in here that unfortunately I didn't follow the direct instructions with their video, which I could say now that I understand why they do it, and I strongly recommend this tip, and that is to go ahead and measure and sit the feet where they actually connect to the T-top to the widest portion of your center console so that they are centered of the T-top. So once you put it up, the actual top is already correctly measured. This will really help you in the long run, and it was something that we actually took back down and redid, and it made it much easier for us to do the final sitting. Another tip, you'll notice that I left most of the bubble wrap on everything. I highly recommend doing this. As you're building this, whether you're building on the dock or on the boat or on the ground, you're going to bang it into things. And leaving that on there doesn't inhibit anything except the points of where you actually have to bolt it together. So I only peeled back in those regions. This really helped protect the unit a lot more and kept us from getting any scratches on it. So now that we've got it set up straight, what we're going to do is place it on our original measurements, and we are also going to start checking the side-to-side measurements, both front and back, so that we know that the T-top is centered in the boat and straight and perpendicular and parallel with the edges of the boat. One thing you don't want to do is have a crooked T-top. Once all the measurements were correct, both top and bottom, and the T-top was centered, go ahead and tighten down all the joints and all the screws before you bolt it to the floor. Of course, making sure all the feet are flat and in an exact position. Now we're ready to go ahead and get the holes pre-drilled. So what I did was go ahead and put a pilot bit in the middle of each of the holes. I then went ahead and moved the unit back, got all the tape out from underneath. I then came back and pre-drilled the holes. This keeps from the actual gel coat from chipping when you actually screw in the panhead stainless steel deck bolts. I also moved the unit back so that you could go ahead and silicone where it needed to be silicone. So the best way to do it is to put a blob over each hole and then create an X pattern with the actual silicone on the floor. Once you get one side, go ahead and do the other side and do the same thing. If you have more than 2 people, you can go ahead and lift the whole entire unit and just sit it down. We did the front, then the back, got all the screws started, and went ahead and got them all placed into the floor. Now, one thing I will say is, in their videos, they say to immediately scrape the actual access adhesive. I don't recommend that. And by the way, I use 5200, highly recommend it as well. I will also put it in comments. I have seen some amazing things done with this stuff. Now it's time to go back, put Loctite on any bolts that you had temporarily placed in. Go ahead and get the back section mounted up. This really makes the T-top look neat once you get this section done. And it also brings in rigidity into the system as you add these pieces and parts. Next, coming up, we'll finish the installation with all the little fine details and adding the cross support struts.